Hello, this is your humble host and narrator, JT Wheatley again, in another episode of the History of Comic Books podcast. This time, the history of DC. Like Superman, the origin of DC begins with two men, Harry Donenfeld and Jack Leibowitz. Harry Donenfeld was born October 16, 1893 in Romania to Ignat Donenfeld and immigrated to Ellis Island with his family at age 5, as part of a large Romanian migration of the time. He grew up on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, at the time one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in the world at an estimated 1,500 people per block, and ran with the local street gangs before marrying his wife, Gussie Weinstein, in 1918. Originally trying his hand at a clothing store, he eventually went to work at Martin Press, which is run by his older brothers, Charles, Mack, and Irving Donenfeld, and would eventually become his fourth partner. Harry shined as a salesman and helped secure a major contract to Hearst Publishing, producing leaflets for their magazines Cosmopolitan and Good Housekeeping. He also produced a massive expanse of unnamed capital, rumored to be from his connections with gangster Frank Costello, who would eventually become one of the heads of the 5 families of the Mafia, using Martin's Press shipments of pulp paper from Canada to smuggle alcohol into the U.S. during Prohibition. By 1923, Harry had forced his older brothers out and became a majority stakeholder of the company, while Irving kept on with a minority stake in head printer. He renamed the company Donny Press and then began publishing pulp magazines, many pornographic in nature. Then on October 1929, he hired the young NYU grad Jack Leibowitz as a favor from a former client, his father Julius. Jack Leibowitz was born Yakov Leibowitz in what was today Ukraine on October 10, 1900, to his mother, Mindy, and a biological father she never identified. She remarried, and Yakov took his stepfather's surname and originally his belief in socialism. The family immigrated to America in 1910, where Yakov became Jack, with his parents becoming Julius and Minnie. He worked his way through New York University to get an accounting degree at age 24, then in honor of his socialist upbringing, went to work for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. Within a year, he was put in charge of the union's strike fund, and after a 6-month strike, it was still solvent under Leibowitz's brilliant accounting. However, it was rumored that Arnold Rothstein did negotiate an end to the strike for a piece of the cut. It was this talent that Harry saw, and soon Jack was running the numbers on Donny Press, keeping the books balanced, and even when the sales dropped during the Great Depression, by ensuring that their bills were paid while also hounding anyone who owed them money as well. It both helped and hurt that Donenfeld insisted on publishing the pornographic pulps like La Perriere Stories and Gay Parisine, called artsy news because they were supposed to be using the images of scientific and artistic reasons, but it became obvious why readers liked them. Pretty soon, the pulps didn't even try to hide what they were, as their titles carried the word pep and spicy. To contain the cost, Donenfeld formed Independent News to handle the distribution, with Paul Samplinger and a large loan from his mother, and with Jack handling the figures, and thus making more money than any other publishing house. It was this combination that made Harry and Jack work. Like any great business pairing, Harry was the showman and the visionary who expanded the company, while Jack was in the background getting the money to fund it. Even their personalities clashed, as Harry, despite being married with 2 children, Irving and Sonia, had a Mr. Sonny on the side and wished to be a gangster like Frank Costello, who was reportedly Irving's godfather. He ran around town, drinking and carousing, with Jack writing checks to keep his behavior quiet. Leibowitz, on the other hand, was a devoted family man to his wife and 2 daughters, and engaged in generous philanthropy, particularly in Jewish causes. Something he did have in common with Harry, who, unlike many of their counterparts at the time, kept their Jewish surnames. However, even Donenfeld held in line when he reportedly could have had the chance to call DC Donenfeld Comics, but instead stuck with Detective Comics, as he knew even that was too Jewish for the times. They also shared the belief that writers and artists were hired hands and didn't deserve royalties. After all, they did pay better than any other publishing house, and even helping in other ways. Leibowitz reportedly could name off a number of debts, mortgages and medical bills, including Joe Shuster, a future employee's eye surgery, that he paid off when it was asked for. Together, they made millions, even with the unwanted attention from the pulps. By February of 1934, they turned to crime pulps with spicy detective stories, and then in the Pep magazine, it featured full frontal nudity, which led to Donenfeld being indicted for publishing obscene material. This particularly scared some of Harry's silent investors who feared the indictment would uncover his ties to organized crime. However, he avoided this by having an employee, Herbie Siegel, take the fall in exchange for guaranteeing a job and paying any legal fees. He probably served 60 to 90 days, and then for decades afterwards, when employees at the future DC Comics would ask, "Who was Herbie?" when they would see him working around there, the legend of Harry Donenfeld just grew. Meanwhile, despite that brief scare, Donenfeld went right back to the pulps with spicy mystery and spicy western. Soon, another business venture was forming when Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson came calling. A former cavalry officer and pulp writer himself, he entered the comic book world with New Fun Comics under his businesses, National Allied Publications, which published original comic book strips in February of 1935, but only lasted 6 issues. Looking for funding to revive it, he turned to Independent News, where Donenfeld was already looking to expand his reach with publishing his pulps and stands across America. Seeing a new opportunity, he took over the comic from Nicholson and assigned his editor, Vince Sullivan, to put together another comic book, which would become Detective Comics, under Detective Comics Incorporated, the future name of DC, conceived as a comic answer to the pulps. Still deep in debt to Harry, Nicholson tried a new comic in November of 1937 with Action Comics and went to Shelley Meyer for help. And it was he who found the samples Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster sent to Charles Gaines for Superman comic strip. However, before Nicholson could reap the benefits of this soon smash success, Harry sent him and his wife off to Cuba to brew up new ideas in early of 1938. While absent, he sued them for non-payment on their loan and pushed DC Incorporated into bankruptcy. Its sale to Independent News was arranged, but a small percentage of More Fun Comics was left to Major to keep him quiet. As a result, he left comics and returned to pulp writing. During this time, sales of magazines and comics were hidden for months due to the consignment system, in which dealers would receive a shipment of the comics on consignment, returning any copies that weren't sold and only paying for those that were. As a result, it was months before DC knew that Action Comics was selling out by the hundreds of thousands. Since McClure printed Action, Charles Gaines got a cut, along with a comic strip for the Superman he arranged for Siegel and Shuster as well. After hoping for years to see their character turned into a strip, it was soon published in 300 papers across America. Gaines also sought to expand his own business, so partnering with Jack, he published All-American Comics in 1938, which produced the heroes like The Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkman, and others. Vince Sullivan, now editor of DC Comics, saw the success of Superman and quickly commissioned Bob Kane and Bill Finger for a new hero, which of course would become Batman in Detective Comics number 27 in spring of 1939. Leibowitz also wanted to avoid the censors and government attention brought on by the pulps, so he hired Whitney Ellsworth and set up DC's first code of conduct, which forbid the heroes from killing and also kept Superman out of the conflict in Europe. That apparently wasn't enough to satisfy Hitler or Mussolini, who cut them out of their markets, Hitler because he thought Superman was too Jewish. Leibowitz also hired famed copyright lawyer Louis Nuzzer to sue Fawcett Publishing, while Jack Schiff was hired to pour over every similarity that Captain Marvel had to Superman. The resulting lawsuit would eventually force Fawcett to cancel his Captain Marvel books, leading to his characters to eventually be absorbed into the DC line. Around this time, Harry's son Irwin came to work for the company under Leibowitz's tutorage. He also started DC's editorial advisory board to counter any criticism. Among him was a doctor in psychology from Harvard, William Moulton Marston, the future creator of Wonder Woman. In 1941, they hired Mort Weisinger, the creator of Captain Future, as an editor and was charged with hiring new writers and artists to replace the old ones. Meanwhile, with the war raging, Harry Donenfeld was soon identified as the voice of Superman over Jerry Siegel, who was serving in the armed forces. At one point, he even commissioned a comic strip of him, giving Superman a spanking, showing it had gone to his head. While Harry was enjoying the high life of being the owner of Superman, Jack went about legitimizing the company, and in 1944 he bought out Charles Gaines from All-American Comics, who went on to found Educational Comics with books like Picture Stories from the Bible, while Jack merged All-American and DC International Comics, and then merged it all together with Independent News to form National Periodical Publications. With the war ending and superheroes no longer as popular, they published Young Romance by Simon and Kirby, and when the censorship started to rear its ugly head, they helped form the CCA, Comic Books Code Authority, in 1954. In 1956, when Martin Goodman lost Atlas distribution for Marvel, Leibowitz came in with Independent to be the distributor, on the condition that Marvel didn't go over 8 comics a month. They even added Mad Magazine to its distribution, which scared Bill Gaines in the belief that another book from him, but instead he got what he called the cleanest contract he had ever seen. Leibowitz also added another notable magazine to its list, Playboy, and then, to handle its ever-expanding merchandising empire, started the Licensing Corporation of America, LCA, in 1961. However, Leibowitz's quest to legitimize the company hit a snag when he needed to finally buy out Donenfeld, whose past mob connections brought too much scrutiny. At first, Harry refused, probably because he loved the idea of owning Superman, but when his wife Gussie got ill, he conceded. She soon died afterwards, and Harry quickly announced his plan to marry his mistress Sunny. But in 1962, Harry got drunk and suffered a crippling head injury. No one knows quite sure how it happened. Of course, a man with his past mob connections, you can sterilize, but most everyone probably agrees it was a drunken accident. Though his daughter, Peachy, her nickname, stated that I know my dad fell down the stairs, but we're pretty sure Mama came down from heaven to push him. He would die 3 years later in February of 1965, with no mention of it in DC Comics. By the mid-1960s, LCA was merchandising not just DC products, but also James Bond and the Beatles. Also, editor Julie Swartz began the revival of DC during the Silver Age of comic books, including a Beatles fan comic to tie in with the merchandise. In 1967, National Publications was purchased by Kinney National Company, which then bought the movie studio Warner Brothers 7 Arts, later to become Warner Communications. Independent news became the basis for Warner Books and Publishing, and now is part of a large media empire that saw the end of the old National Comics, with Jack Leibowitz now being named on the board of Warner Brothers. In 1976, Jeanette Kahn was named the new publisher of National Publications. At 28, she was the youngest senior executive at Warner Communications and in the world of comics, with an art history degree from Harvard and a belief that comic books were an art form. Plus, she was a woman, which was entirely unheard of at the time. However, she knew publishing, having already launched 3 successful kid magazines, and couldn't wait to tackle comic books that she had read since she was a little kid. When she met with Bill Sarnoff, the head of Warner Publishing, he reportedly proposed ending new comic books and just focusing on licensing and merchandising the current ones. How serious he was, we may never know, but Kahn argued that to do so would be let these heroes wither on the vine. Once in charge, Kahn made a symbolic but important move in finally renaming National Periodical Publications to DC Comics. She also realized the days of millions in comic book sales were long past, but they were still a source of revenue as an intellectual property generator, using this as sources for other media, such as cartoons and movies. Now that it was part of a larger media empire in Warner Communications, it wasn't long before they started churning out cartoons like Super Friends, and TV shows like Wonder Woman, and movies like Superman. Also, with editor Paul Leibowitz, she gave creators in 1976 20% of licensing fees for their characters, and in 1981, 5% of revenues in comic books that sold over 100,000 copies. It wasn't just altruistic, but an attempt to attract top creators to DC, who suddenly offered a better deal than Marvel, at least until they matched the offer. As for Jack Leibowitz, he would remain on the board of Warner Brothers until he died in 1991, finally relinquishing his title at the age of 91. Finally, on December 14th of 2000, he died at the age of 100, leaving behind a personal fortune of hundreds of millions of dollars and helping form a media empire in Warner Brothers. An interesting ending to a former son of a socialist and union accountant. Like all times in the industry, there is much good and bad remembered about him. He formed a brilliant company and helped guide it through its tumultuous times, essentially forming a comics medium. To some, he was a generous philanthropist, having given to numerous charities. To others, like his employees, he was ruthless, who didn't believe in compensation or royalties for writers. Nevertheless, in 1985, he was naturally named one of the 50 most important people who made DC. As for DC Comics itself, it is now part of the larger Time Warner Corporation, still publishing comics under the DC Entertainment, which was organized in September of 2009 and then had its offices moved from New York to Burbank, California in October of 2013 on the Warner Bros. Lot, bringing all films, animation, and so forth under one umbrella. In May of 2016, following the footsteps of Marvel, they formed DC Films in the hope of creating a shared cinematic universe, but to lesser success. Nevertheless, it is this structure that does protect DC, especially turning the speculation crash in the 1990s. For as long as there are Superman toys and Batman video games, they will have their comic books, and thus they will continue to fly under the DC symbol.
My name is Mark McCray, and I'm the author of The Best Saturdays of Our Lives.
I'm Dan Klink, co-host of the Best Saturdays of Our Lives podcast.
The Best Saturdays of Our Lives features programming trends from the 1966 television season all the way through the last hurrah of the early digital age of the 1990s.
On the show, if it's animated, we talk about it.
Order your signed copy today at tbsool.com.
And listen to the podcast at esonetwork.com and all podcast platforms.
And now is June 6, 2024, time for the favorite comic book of the week. X-Men number 35/Uncanny X-Men number 700 by various artists, which finds the final wrap-up to the Krakoa age as the final fate of the Krakoa Island is revealed, along with the setup for the upcoming relaunch of the X-Books. This is a great book that features a lot of artists from the current run, from Jerry Dugan, Al Ewing, and Kieran Gillen, that pretty much explains the what's happening with Krakoa, and also sets up the future runs. I mean, Krakoa, the nice thing about this event is that they don't sweep Krakoa under the rug in a complete reboot. They reveal that, no, it's still technically around, and they do also undo a big event from decades ago that does give the X-Men and the Mutants something of a win despite losing their homeland. And the stories that follow in the book, there's a nice setup for also revealing where the X-Men are going to be going. And there's a great one by Chris Claremont, which delves into the family of Nightcrawler, Rogue, Mystique, and Destiny. That really, with the original events, the revelation of who Mystique is in relation to Nightcrawler is a great reveal in general, and a great read. And this makes for a nice bow on the wrapping of the Krakoa age, which I'll be honest with you, I liked some, didn't like some. My favorite's still the Exterminators, which was that fantastic lineup of Wolverine, Jubilee, Boom Boom, and Dazzler taking on vampires. And that is the biggest missed opportunity of this current Blood Hunt event by Marvel, is that they should have had that team reunited to take on the vampires in this one. I mean, they got Jubilee and Wolverine in their own separate issues, but I can imagine Exterminators getting together. Just such a missed opportunity. But overall, good wrap up of the event overall, and kind of excited about the current reboot, especially with some of the artists and writers that are coming on, especially like Jed McKay and Gail Simone. So we see where it goes, but nice little tie-up in the Krakoa age. And then with that, we will conclude with this episode of The Archives. Joining us next week with another episode of The Archives. And until then, go out and enjoy yourself a good comic book.